Helena is an ordinary middle-aged woman raising her son alone while teaching literature at the university. Occasionally, a young and successful man named Alexander visits her. They spend time together intimately, after which Alexander leaves, never staying long. Helena is content with these brief moments, but once he leaves, she returns to her routine, cooking for her son, taking him to school, and going to work. Though she constantly thinks about Alexander, her life begins to revolve around him, making it impossible to live normally anymore. One day, Helena goes to the cinema with a friend and confides in her about Alexander. Her friend advises her to find a stable man, warning that Alexander will eventually leave her, but Helena is willing to take that risk. She is convinced that Alexander will eventually leave his wife for her. A few days later, Alexander calls Helena, telling her he'll be there soon. She puts aside her work and prepares for his arrival. When he arrives, they immediately become intimate, and shortly after, Alexander leaves without a word. Distracted by thoughts of him, Helena forgets that her son is coming home from school. Helena tries to focus on work but finds herself constantly looking at a photo of Alexander with his wife. A few days later, Alexander visits again, telling her how much he enjoys their time together, something he's never experienced before. Helena begins to eagerly anticipate his next visit. When Alexander returns, Helena gives him a note asking him to read it after he leaves. In the meantime, Helena decides to start learning Russian. During another visit, Helena tries to have a deeper conversation with Alexander, asking him about his job. He works at the embassy guarding wealthy individuals, and his numerous tattoos make Helena wonder if he was ever in prison. Alexander doesn't answer directly but notes that while most French people are afraid of Russians, Helena isn't, which is why he likes her. He tells her he wants to be with her but mentions that he'll soon be leaving for Moscow with his wife for 3 weeks. Helena is devastated by this news. As the days pass, Helena finds herself struggling with Alexander's absence. Nothing in her life brings her joy anymore, except thoughts of him. She tries to distract herself by inviting her son to Florence, but he doesn't want to miss school or football practice. Despite her efforts to occupy her mind, everything reminds her of Alexander. Finally, the 3 weeks pass and Alexander returns to France. He messages Helena, asking her to meet him at her home. She rushes home after work, where Alexander is waiting. However, this time he behaves differently. He criticizes her for wearing a short skirt and orders her never to wear it again. Though Helena resents being told what to do, when Alexander grabs her by the neck, she submits, willing to endure anything for him. Alexander leaves once more, and Helena finds herself missing him all over again. During their next meeting, Helena asks Alexander where he lives in Russia, and he tells her he lives in Moscow on T Street. Helena is eager to learn as much as she can about Alexander's life. She's in love with him. During their next meeting, she confesses her feelings, but Alexander doesn't reciprocate. When she asks him to stay with her all day, he refuses and tells her not to call his phone anymore, saying he'll reach out when he wants to see her. Desperate, Helena locks the front door to keep him from leaving, but Alexander forces her to give up the key. Helena decides to confide in her friend, who tries to explain that Alexander doesn't love her. However, Helena isn't ready to accept the truth and becomes angry, fearing that Alexander will never come back. One day, as Helena takes her son to school, she promises to attend his next football match, but he doesn't believe her. As he goes to the trunk to get his things, Helena is distracted by a message on her phone, hoping it's from Alexander, and she doesn't notice her son. Later, Alexander arrives at Helena's house, but she doesn't let him in. Without hesitation, he turns and leaves. Helena quickly opens the door and runs after him, but an hour later, Alexander leaves while she's in the shower. Weeks go by, and Alexander doesn't call. Frustrated, Helena decides to contact the embassy to speak with him directly. Alexander sets a morning meeting at a hotel, but when Helena arrives, she waits all day, and Alexander never shows up. When she calls the embassy again, she learns that Alexander has flown to Moscow. Depressed, Helena spends the night wandering the city while her son waits for her at home. She stays in bed all day, neglecting her son, who ends up asking his father to come get him. Helena's ex-husband criticizes her for not taking care of their son and for being obsessed with her boyfriend. He takes their son with him. Helena begins to see Alexander everywhere she goes, driving her to the brink of madness. In her desperation, she buys a ticket to Moscow, hoping to find Alexander on T Street. Upon her return to France, Helena starts seeing a psychologist, opening up about her life. 3 months pass, and she begins to forget about Alexander. She brings her son home and attends all of his football games. her life gradually improves, and her affair with Alexander becomes a distant memory. However, one day Alexander calls and says he's coming over. Helena asks her son to spend the night with the neighbors, though he doesn't want to leave. She insists. When Alexander arrives, they go straight to the bedroom. Helena invites him to stay the night, but he declines. She takes him to town and says goodbye. Before leaving, Alexander finally confesses his love for her. Helena realizes that this is the last time they'll see each other, but she feels grateful that he was a part of her life, even if only for a short while. With that, the film ends. This film deeply explores human psychology, showing how despair and loneliness can lead to self-destruction. Helena's story is a narrative about how passion out of control can destroy everyday life. In search of warmth and attention, she becomes a victim of her own illusions and emotional dependence, endangering not only her well-being but also her relationship with her son. The film raises important questions about the nature of love and affection. Helena, it seems, is ready to sacrifice everything for the sake of fleeting meetings with Alexander, whom she idealizes. This shows how sometimes people cling to the illusion, believing that the person who is hurting will eventually change. But Alexander remains selfish, using Helena to satisfy his needs, never offering her what she really wants: love and devotion. The narrative also focuses on the devastating consequences of such addiction. Helena cannot focus on her career, loses touch with her son, and moves away from reality, completely absorbed in thoughts about Alexander. This illustrates how emotional addiction can ruin a life and how important it is to keep a balance between your feelings and responsibilities. When Helena finally realizes that her romance was a fantasy, it becomes cathartic for her. She understands that true love is impossible when a person is completely absorbed in his passion and expectations, ignoring reality. Saying goodbye to Alexander, Helena finally finds her peace and begins to return to normal life, taking care of her son and her career. The film leaves the audience with an important message: true love and happiness are possible only when a person learns to love and respect himself, and not to seek salvation in others. It shows how important it is to keep a clear mind and not let emotions control your life, especially when these emotions are based on illusions and unhealthy attachments. From the point of view of love, the film is a painful exploration of one-sided feelings and addiction. Helena's love for Alexander is not mutual affection, but rather an illusion in which she finds temporary solace from loneliness and dissatisfaction. This love does not bring her happiness or harmony, but on the contrary, draws her into a cycle of emotional suffering and deception. Helena sincerely believes that her feelings for Alexander can lead to something more and hopes that he will leave his wife for her. However, her love remains unrequited, and Alexander uses it exclusively to satisfy his desires. This raises the question of how destructive love can be if it is not reciprocated and based on unequal relationships. The film shows how easy it is to confuse passion and addiction with true love. Helena is obsessed with Alexander, and this obsession destroys her inner world and relationships with her loved ones. She forgets about herself, her needs and interests, completely immersing herself in a relationship that will never be able to satisfy her true emotional needs. The ending of the film symbolizes Helena's realization that her love was an illusion, and that the real path to happiness lies through self-acceptance and the ability to move on. Love, which is based on respect and mutual understanding, ultimately brings joy and peace, while unhealthy attachment leads only to pain and disappointment. This film reminds us that true love is not just passion or strong emotions, but also respect, trust, and mutual support. True love requires a balance between yourself and your partner, and most importantly, it requires self-love. Please subscribe and like, it will help me a lot. Also, you can write in the comments your wishes, and I will read and take them into account in the future.